Hey there, everybody. On to the next module, and we are going to pivot here and go away from the narrative film. We've been watching all narrative films up to now, and we are going to move on to a documentary. This is the only documentary that we're going to be watching the entire class. And you can see here the name of the film is Searching for Sugarman. Again, nonfiction storytelling and the power of the documentary. That's what we're going to focus on this week. So let's dive in. So Sugarman, Searching for Sugarman. This is a Swedish film from 2012. It's an Oscar-winning documentary, so this won the documentary for full-length feature documentary. The director's name is Malik Benjalul. I think I got that right. And the majority of this film was done or filmed in two places, Cape Town, South Africa, and Detroit, Michigan. There were a few other locations where things were filmed, but that's the majority of where it was done in those two countries. And as you watch the film, you'll kind of see why that's the case, okay? And before we move on too far, I wanted to talk a little bit about docs in general. Typically, when you are working on a documentary film, I've worked on a few, mainly as a camera person, not really the person producing it or coming up with the idea or anything like that. But when you're a doc filmmaker, there's typically three stories that you make your way through or that you find as you're producing the movie. Number one, it's the story that you think you're setting out to tell when you first get going, okay? You have an idea, you want to make a story about something, you know of an event, or you know something that you think people need to hear about or whatever. And that's what you set out to tell. You write your outline, you kind of put all your stuff together. And then when you go out and you film, and you get the interviews, like you talk to the people who were around and then understand the event or whatever, or know the person you're making the movie about, your story actually is going to change because these people are going to tell you things that you didn't know and that you never even thought of, and it's going to alter what your story actually is, okay? And then you're going to get into post-production. And in post-production is where you're actually going to find the story that's going to be told. Okay, it's the third story that you find. You're going to be there with all the footage, all the stuff that you have, all the research you've done, all the things that people said, whatever it is, all the B-roll you went and did. And you start to tell the story and you try to find the flow to it all, you're going to develop this third story. And that's the one you're actually going to present to the people, okay? Which is usually a lot different, or there are major differences from the actual story that you intended and set out to tell at the beginning. So documentary filmmaking is much different than narrative filmmaking, just a different process altogether. So we'll talk more about that as we move through here. So things to think about, okay? So one of the questions you want to ask yourself, and I answer it for you right there, does the doc story structure work the same way as narrative film? Okay. In this particular documentary, it does. Now you'll find stuff that alters or wavers or changes the structure a little bit. So if this one does follow a traditional kind of narrative structure, then what changes? What's the difference? Well, it says it right there. Narrative filmmaking has this very elaborate pre-production process where we lay out and organize every single frame, exactly how we're going to shoot it, exactly how we're going to edit it, how we're going to light it. The director's going to understand how they want the performances to go and all that good stuff. It's very, very choreographed, okay? And the doc, the story is found through kind of research and through the interviews. You aren't really coaching and designing your way through it. You're really just taking in the information that you're finding and getting, and that's how you're going to kind of shape the story at the end, right? Editing takes on a much larger role in the storytelling process for a documentary film, okay? You actually make your film, when you're talking about narrative filmmaking, you actually make the movie in pre-production. And then when you get on set with the camera, you're actually just executing a plan that you've kind of developed already. When you are making a documentary, you kind of find that film and find that story in editing. All right. So those are the major differences when it comes to this. Okay. So we talked a little bit about structure. Now, up to this point, all we've really talked about when we're talking about structure is, are we watching a traditional storyline where the film runs from in a narrative fashion from beginning to end, just how it would kind of play out in real life? That's all we've talked about. Or is it an experimental structure where the story is being told out of order, kind of like a Pulp Fiction type thing? Or are they using flashbacks and flash forwards and jumping around in time, things like that? Those would be experimental or untraditional types of structure. So we haven't really dove into the pieces of structure, but in this particular movie we are, right? So when you take a look at kind of films and how they work and why they work, there are things that they all have that we can kind of latch onto, okay? Now, this isn't a complete list of everything. Story structure can actually be very complex. There's actually several different types of structure. You know, there's the 3-act structure, which a lot of people know. There's a 5-act structure. There's something called Save the Cat, which is actually 15 points. There's the hero's journey. There's a few different, again, there's other ones as well, okay? But what I've laid out here are some things that these are things that kind of all of these different types of structures include, okay? So number one, we need a central character, all right? So there's got to be this person that we're kind of following, the protagonist. It's their story that we're usually hearing. So I want you to kind of watch the movie Searching for Sugarman and see if you can kind of figure out who this film is about, okay? Usually this central character, this protagonist, has some kind of a goal. There's something they're setting out to do, which is kind of what the journey is if you're looking at that kind of type of film, all right? So I want you to see if you kind of point out what if you figure out who the central character is, what their goal is, okay? Oftentimes there's an inciting incident, okay? The inciting incident is this thing that happens that drives the rest of the movie, okay? They haven't really decided that they're going to actually take this journey yet, but it's this thing that happens. It's kind of a call to action-y kind of a thing, something like that, okay? Like in the film Toy Story, the original one, when Woody knocks Buzz Lightyear out the window, that's the inciting incident in Toy Story. The whole rest of the movie is about trying to get Buzz back in the house, right? Before they move. That's the inciting incident. Now, when Woody knocks Buzz out the window, he hasn't decided that he's actually going to get out there and go help him and try to get him in. But this is the incident that happens that drives the rest of the film, okay? So again, look for something that you find would be what would call the inciting incident in Searching for Sugarman, okay? All films are going to have some kind of a midpoint, okay? This is kind of the middle of the film, as it says, or as it suggests, okay? Oftentimes, there's a goal shift here. Sometimes it feels like the lowest point for our central character, our protagonist. Sometimes there's kind of a thing that happens that may be like a high point, but then it ends up being a reversal of fortune. Something goes sideways. You usually will have this, but one of the things that a lot of movies do is when you get to the midpoint, the goal actually shifts or changes. All right. So in the film Up, let's say, okay, I talk about Up a lot, and when I talk about structure, Carl, his initial goal is to get his house to Paradise Falls, okay, so he can honor his wife. But when he meets Muntz, he's got his little gang of people that have kind of followed him along, and he eventually runs into this guy Muntz, who's like an adventurer out there searching for this bird. His goal actually shifts. His goal then becomes, I have to get away from Muntz because Muntz is trying to kill me and my gang of friends here. Okay, so that's the midpoint in the movie Up, when he meets Muntz and they realize Muntz is actually a bad guy. That shifts the goal for the main character, who is Carl in that movie. So look for a spot in the film where you feel like the goal actually changed. Right? The climax of the film. So usually there is some big kind of thing where everything kind of comes, to this like breaking point, right? Sometimes it's the final battle between the good guy and the bad guy. Sometimes it's it depends. If you're watching a rom-com, there's not going to be a big battle fight sequence. There's going to be some kind of moment where the two come together and they have to make a decision. Is he going to try to get the girl back, or is just let her go and live her life, or whatever it might be, right? There's going to be this climactic thing, and the central character has to decide whether or not they're going to kind of accept this deal, or they're going to go for it, or whatever, they're going to let it go. Usually they kind of accept the challenge in that regard. So there's this big kind of culminating moment. That's the climax of the film. So see if you can figure out what would be the climax of this film, which may be a little tricky to figure this out, but there's one that you should be able to point out. And then the resolution. So the resolution is what's this new world look like? Okay, we've come to the climax. Somebody won the final battle or the final thing played out, and this is what happened. What's our new world order? What's our new balance? Right? Again, in Up, the new balance is that Carl shows up for his new friends, and he's going to take this new journey with I forget the kid's name, but the Boy Scout kind of kid. I forget his name off the top of my head, but they kind of go off and have new adventures, or it's alluded to that, right? So is there a resolution in this movie? Do they kind of tell us what happened to the people in this story? That's what you're looking for. Now, at the end of the film, I'm going to come back. There'll be a little video underneath the movie, and it's going to be the same page, and but I'm going to talk through these different spots: the central character, the goal, the inciting incident, midpoint, climax, and resolution. Okay, so I want you to kind of sit back and kind of figure out if you can point out some of these spots, and then I'll come back and kind of let you know where they all land in the movie. All right. So still talking about narrative here. Again, we're watching a documentary film, which typically equals nonfiction or implies the truth, okay? So this is a true story. It's not fictional. There's nothing that you're going to see that's kind of made up. There might be a couple reenactments in the movie. I can't remember. I think there might be one or two. But those are kind of played out as visual representations of what you're hearing people say, all right? But ultimately, when you're talking about documentary, the thing you have to always understand is that the director still controls everything that we're seeing, everything that we're hearing. It's really difficult, or some would say impossible, to tell a completely objective story in a documentary. People may set out to do that, but if you, as a filmmaker, are making a cut in the movie, like you're deciding when to cut the camera and cut to a new shot, then you've made a choice. So the audience doesn't get to see what came after that cut, right? When someone gets interviewed, usually for a documentary, you interview somebody for, 20, 30, 40 minutes, up to like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours, right? But what ends up in the movie is just a few minutes. Okay, well, the director has made cuts and chopped out large portions of people's conversation. Well, those are choices that they made, and they're only allowing you to hear certain things they said to create the context that they want to create. Again, so that makes it not objective. Okay, so just because it's a documentary, it doesn't mean that everything is objective and completely truthful. Okay, in fact, you get into filmmaking where it starts to turn into kind of propaganda. People have an agenda, and they're trying to get you to buy into what they think is whatever the truth is, right? So you do have to take it with a grain of salt. Do your own research. Go look things up. Find out things. That's what documentary filmmaking is about. It's even what narrative filmmaking is about. Is they want to tell you stories, and then they want you to leave the film and go explore more and learn more, and just continue with the story. All right. So think about that, especially as you're watching documentary filmmaking. It's a great place to like learn stuff that maybe you never even had heard about or known about in the past, which is kind of cool. This image right here is just an example of kind of where the director's POV kind of can take over a documentary, right? So here we have two images. The top image is Cape Town, South Africa, and you can see it's this beautiful space on this very windy road overlooking the water. It's a very beautiful spot. That's what this filmmaker wants to show us as Cape Town, South Africa. And then we're in Detroit, Michigan on the bottom shot. And there are some nice areas in Detroit, Michigan. There's some very developed areas, some really big cityscapes. It's got kind of an older kind of vibe to it. It's an older city, but it has these beautiful areas in it. But this is kind of the imagery that this director is putting on screen. You got this guy walking past his house that looks like it's definitely a little run down, and it's under construction, and it's not in a very like upscale neighborhood necessarily. All the grass on in the yard and on the sidewalk side is not very groomed and well kept. It's all overgrown. So the director, by choosing the imagery, is again affecting how we perceive what's going on. Okay, so again, this is just an example of how a director affects the POV in a story. And again, it's not to say that he's trying to be dishonest or they're trying to be dishonest or anything. They just have this kind of, this is how they want to present their story. And that becomes influence over the documentary itself. Okay. So one of the things that we deal with in this particular movie in the narrative is apartheid. Okay. A lot of people might not even know what that is. They may have heard of it. Some may not. But what is apartheid? So apartheid, it stems from in the 1940s in South Africa, the population was 80% black, but the ruling government was all these old white dudes. Okay. And so in the 40s, they set out a bunch of segregation laws that were put in place from the 1940s, late 40s, I believe, up until the early 90s. These laws were in place, which is pretty crazy considering, kind of just think about like what we were like in the 90s. You may not be old enough, but talk to your parents. They'll definitely remember. This went on for a really long time in modern history. Okay. So these are kind of, our equivalent would be like Jim Crow laws, or even going back to like, not necessarily slavery, but I would say more Jim Crow laws in the US, which happens earlier and ends before the 90s here in the United States. So this whole event plays a major role in our documentary, Searching for Sugarman. Okay, so one of the things that docs can do is they can teach us about world events, possibly inspire us to be good global citizens, to go find things out, and to help kind of fight back against things like this if we see this happening on our own community, right? Or our own, where we are, where we live in the world. So documentaries can be pretty powerful in that way. So I wanted to point out that, again, part of this narrative, it hits on a very major historical moment in world history. And so take a peek at that and see if you learn something about it, right? Because you may not know much about it.